72 hours. That is the entire window between the moment Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz and the moment the global economy begins a collapse that no central bank, no government stimulus package, no emergency reserve release, and no diplomatic intervention can arrest. Not slow down, not soften. Arrest. Because what is moving through the Strait of Hormuz every single day is not just oil. It is the blood supply of the entire global industrial system, the energy that powers every factory, every hospital, every data center, every transportation network, and every heated home in the northern hemisphere during winter. Remove it for 72 hours, and the system does not pause. It begins to die, and Iran just removed it, completely, permanently, until its terms are met. If you think you understand what a Strait of Hormuz closure means, stay with me for the next 20 minutes. Because the real numbers, what happens to oil, to food, to medicine, to your savings, to the dollar in your wallet, and to the political stability of every government on earth that depends on economic growth to survive, those numbers are nothing like what the headlines are telling you. And by the time this video is done, you will understand exactly why 72 hours is not a dramatic exaggeration. It is a precise engineering calculation, and the clock is already running. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching this from right now. Drop your country or your city in the comments below. This series reaches viewers in more than 60 countries, and we genuinely want to know where this story is landing today. Whether you are in the United States, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, or anywhere else on Earth, put your location in the comments right now. 5 seconds. We rate every single one. Now let us get into the numbers that will define the next 72 hours of human civilization. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 21 miles. You could drive across it in 20 minutes on a highway. You could see across it on a clear day from a tall building on the Iranian shore. It is, by every geographic measure, an insignificant sliver of water between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. And it is, by every economic measure, the single most important choke point on the surface of the earth. Through those 21 miles, every single day moves approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil. 21 million barrels. That is roughly 21% of the entire world's daily oil consumption, transiting a waterway narrow enough that you can stand on one shore and see the other. It is also the route through which approximately 20% of global liquefied natural gas supply moves, the LNG that heats homes in Japan, powers industry in South Korea, and has been replacing Russian pipeline gas in Europe since the Ukraine invasion. And it is the route through which the petrochemical feedstocks, the refined petroleum products, and the industrial raw materials that manufacturing economies from Germany to India to China depend on to keep their production lines running flow every single day without interruption. Every single day, for 50 years, without interruption. Because for 50 years, the American military presence in the Persian Gulf, the carriers, the destroyers, the minesweepers, the maritime patrol aircraft operating from Diego Garcia and Al-Udeid and the other bases, that this series has systematically watched Iran degrade and destroy across 16 episodes, has guaranteed that no power on earth could close the strait without facing an immediate and overwhelming American military response that would reopen it within hours. Diego Garcia is gone. Al-Udeid's runways are craters. The carriers that guaranteed Hormuz passage are at the bottom of the Arabian Sea. The electronic warfare systems that protected American air operations have been defeated. The CENTCOM Forward Headquarters has been struck and is operating from an airborne command post. The conditions that made an Iranian Hormuz closure a theoretical risk rather than an operational reality have been systematically eliminated across 16 episodes of the most methodical, asymmetric campaign in military history. And Iran, having eliminated those conditions with the patience and precision that this series has documented from episode 1, has now done what every energy economist, every naval strategist, and every geopolitical analyst has spent 50 years hoping would never happen. It closed the strait. The closure was executed using a combination of 3 simultaneous operational elements that Iran had been preparing in parallel with every military action this series has documented. Because the Hormuz closure was never a contingency plan for Iran. It was always the destination. Every missile strike, every drone swarm, every runway denial, every carrier attack, every electronic warfare operation was a step toward the moment when Iran could close the strait without facing the American military response that would have reopened it immediately. That moment arrived when the last American carrier capable of sustained combat operations in the Persian Gulf was mission killed in episode 14. Iran waited 48 hours after that engagement, 48 hours during which global markets were already absorbing the carrier losses, during which American military planners were already running the Hormuz closure scenario in their war games, during which every energy trader on Earth was already pricing elevated Hormuz closure risk into their positions. And then Iran executed. The first element of the closure was mining. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the branch specifically responsible for Persian Gulf operations and specifically designed for exactly this mission, deployed an estimated 340 bottom-influence mines across the Strait's 2 navigable channels in a 12-hour operation conducted at night using a combination of submarines, surface vessels operating under the cover of routine fishing boat traffic, and autonomous underwater vehicles that laid mines on programmed patterns without surface support. Bottom-influence mines sit on the seabed and detonate when a vessel's magnetic signature, acoustic signature, or pressure signature passes within their detection range. They cannot be swept by conventional minesweeping equipment without precise knowledge of their locations. They cannot be detected by surface radar. They cannot be neutralized by airstrikes. They can only be cleared by specialist mine countermeasures vessels, ships specifically designed and equipped for mine hunting and neutralization, working slowly, carefully, and systematically across the affected waterway. The United States Navy's mine countermeasures capability, which was already limited relative to the scale of a full Strait mining operation, has been further degraded by the loss of the support infrastructure at Diego Garcia and the Persian Gulf bases that provided the logistics backbone for mine countermeasures operations in the region. Clearing 340 bottom-influence mines from the Strait of Hormuz's navigable channels, with the mine countermeasures assets currently available to American and Allied naval forces in the region, will take a minimum of 18 to 22 days under ideal conditions. Ideal conditions do not currently exist in the Strait of Hormuz. The second element was anti-ship missile positioning. Iran deployed mobile anti-ship missile batteries, Noor and Khalej Fars systems, the same weapons that appeared in previous episodes of this series, to positions along both the Iranian and, through Houthi proxy arrangements, the Yemeni coastlines overlooking the Strait's approach corridors. The coverage geometry created by this positioning means that any vessel attempting to transit the Strait without Iranian authorization is within the engagement envelope of at least 2 separate anti-ship missile batteries simultaneously for the entire length of the transit. A commercial tanker transiting the Strait at standard speed is within that coverage envelope for approximately 4 hours. 4 hours of continuous exposure to anti-ship missile systems that Iran has demonstrated across this series it is willing and able to fire. No commercial shipping company's insurance underwriter will cover a vessel making that transit. No commercial shipping company's board of directors will authorize it. The tankers are not being physically stopped. They are being economically stopped, the distinction that makes the closure simultaneously more effective and more legally ambiguous than a physical blockade. The third element was the Iranian Navy's surface fleet, deploying to positions that physically block the Strait's navigable channels with a combination of fast attack craft, frigates, and the threat of further mine deployment, creating the visual and radar confirmation of Iranian military control of the waterway that the mining and missile positioning alone do not provide. The surface fleet is not the operationally decisive element of the closure. It is the communicative element, the physical presence that tells every satellite surveillance system, every maritime tracking service, and every shipping company's operations center monitoring the Strait that the closure is real, deliberate, and enforced. The first tanker to attempt transit after the closure was announced turned back at the Strait's entrance when its radar detected the Iranian surface fleet positioning, and its master received confirmation from the ship's insurance underwriter that war risk coverage was suspended for the transit. The second tanker turned back for the same reasons. By the time the sixth tanker had turned back, the maritime tracking services that monitor global shipping movements in real time were reporting 0 transit attempts in progress across the Strait of Hormuz. 0. For the first time in recorded peacetime history, the Strait of Hormuz had 0 commercial vessels in transit. The world's most important energy chokepoint was closed, and the 72-hour clock started running from that moment. Now here is where Geopolitics Meets Money gives you the precise hour-by-hour breakdown of what happens to the global economy across those 72 hours, because this is not a general prediction. This is an engineering calculation based on the specific inventory levels, consumption rates, and supply chain dependencies of the global industrial system. The numbers are precise because the dependencies are precise, and understanding them precisely is the only way to understand why 72 hours is the real threshold and not a dramatic approximation. In the first 12 hours after the Strait closes, the immediate visible consequence is the oil price. Brent crude, which had already been trading at elevated levels across this series, moves to $600 per barrel within the first trading session after the closure is confirmed. Not $400, not $500, $600 per barrel. At $600 oil, the economic calculation for every energy-dependent industry on Earth changes simultaneously and completely. Airlines, which operate on margins that become negative when jet fuel exceeds approximately $180 per barrel equivalent, do not begin reducing flights gradually at $600 oil. They begin emergency capacity reduction within hours as their treasury departments calculate that every flight they operate at current fuel prices burns cash faster than the ticket revenue covers it. The capacity reduction begins in the highest cost routes first. transoceanic routes, long-haul freight operations, the cargo flights that move time-sensitive manufactured goods between production locations and markets. Those routes go dark first, and when they go dark, the supply chains they support begin to fail. In the first 24 hours, the consequence moves from price to physical supply. The world's most energy-dependent manufacturing economies, Japan, South Korea, Germany, and the others that import essentially all of their oil and natural gas rather than producing it domestically, begin drawing down their strategic petroleum reserves. Japan's strategic reserve holds approximately 145 days of consumption at normal rates. South Korea's holds approximately 92 days. Germany's holds approximately 90 days. These are substantial buffers, but they are not infinite, and drawing them down at the rates that $600 oil makes economically rational, drawing them down to sell into spot markets at $600 per barrel while replacing them later at presumably lower prices when the strait reopens, depletes them on timelines that the governments managing those reserves calculate differently than the markets that are pricing the oil. The markets price the immediate shortage. The governments manage the strategic buffer. The tension between those two calculations produces the political instability that begins to emerge in the first 24 hours and accelerates through the 72-hour window. At 36 hours, the consequence moves from energy markets to food markets. This is the connection that most people do not make when they think about an oil price spike. The connection between petroleum prices and food prices that makes an energy crisis simultaneously a food crisis on a timeline that is faster than most people expect. Nitrogen fertilizer, the primary input that modern industrial agriculture uses to achieve the crop yields that feed 8 billion people, is manufactured from natural gas through the Haber-Bosch process. 20% of the world's traded natural gas moves through the Strait of Hormuz. At 36 hours of strait closure, the natural gas that was supposed to arrive at fertilizer production facilities in Europe and Asia this week has not arrived. Fertilizer production begins to fall. Fertilizer that has not been produced cannot be applied to crops. Crops that do not receive fertilizer at the right point in their growing cycle produce lower yields. Lower yields mean less food. Less food means higher food prices. And food price spikes, as the Arab Spring of 2011 demonstrated with precise clarity, are the most politically destabilizing economic event that a government can face, because food insecurity does not produce polite policy debates. It produces street protests that become political crises, that become government collapses on timelines measured in weeks rather than months. The 36-hour food price signal is not a collapse. It is a warning, a futures market movement in wheat, corn, soybeans, and rice that tells agricultural traders that the fertilizer supply disruption is being priced into crop production expectations 6 months from now. But the warning produces immediate behavior changes in food importing nations that are already managing elevated food inflation from the energy price increases of the previous 16 episodes of this series. Governments that were already politically vulnerable on food prices begin making the decisions that politically vulnerable governments make. When they see the next shock coming, export restrictions, strategic stockpile purchases, bilateral supply agreements that prioritize domestic food security over international market participation. Each of those decisions, made rationally by individual governments managing their own political survival, makes the global food supply system less efficient and less resilient simultaneously. The collective action problem that makes global food security so difficult to manage in a crisis, every country rationally doing what is best for itself in ways that make the overall system worse for everyone, begins activating at the 36-hour mark. At 48 hours, the consequence reaches the financial system at its deepest layer. Not equity markets, not commodity markets, not currency markets. The interbank lending market, the system through which banks lend money to each other on short terms to manage their daily liquidity needs. The plumbing of the global financial system that keeps every other financial market functioning. The interbank market is sensitive to counterparty risk, the risk that the bank you're lending to overnight will not be able to repay you in the morning because something happened to its balance sheet while you were both sleeping. In normal conditions, counterparty risk in the interbank market is minimal because the banks know each other, their balance sheets are transparent, and the regulatory framework provides sufficient confidence that overnight lending is safe. In the conditions that exist at 48 hours of strait closure, $600 oil, airline capacity emergency reductions, fertilizer supply disruption, food price spikes, equity market declines of between 20 and 30% across Asian and European markets, and a dollar that has fallen 18% against the Swiss franc and the Japanese yen, the bank's balance sheet exposures to energy sector lending, shipping sector lending, airline sector lending, and the sovereign debt of the governments most affected by the closure becomes simultaneously uncertain in ways that their overnight counterparties cannot quickly assess. When counterparties cannot quickly assess balance sheet safety, they stop lending overnight. When overnight lending stops, banks that depend on it to manage their daily liquidity face a funding gap that they fill by selling assets. When every bank sells assets simultaneously to fill funding gaps, asset prices fall. When asset prices fall, balance sheets deteriorate further. When balance sheets deteriorate, counterparty risk increases further. When counterparty risk increases, overnight lending contracts further. The cycle accelerates. And the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan, all three of which have been activating emergency facilities across this series with progressively less market stabilizing effect, activate simultaneously at the 48-hour mark with coordinated unlimited liquidity support that prevents the interbank market from seizing entirely but cannot address the underlying cause of the risk assessment problem, which is $600 oil in a closed Strait of Hormuz. At 72 hours, the consequence reaches the threshold that makes this episode's title precise rather than dramatic. The threshold is not a single market event. It is the simultaneous arrival of four separate cascades: the energy cascade, the food cascade, the financial cascade, the political cascade, at a point of mutual reinforcement where each cascade accelerates the others, faster than any policy response can interrupt any one of them. Energy at $600 makes food more expensive. More expensive food makes political instability more likely. Political instability makes financial markets more volatile. More volatile financial markets make the cost of government borrowing higher. Higher borrowing costs make it harder for governments to fund the emergency responses. Fuel subsidies, food assistance, financial system support, that would slow the cascades. Harder to fund emergency responses means the cascades accelerate. Accelerating cascades means more political instability. The feedback loop closes at 72 hours and the system enters a self-reinforcing contraction that has no natural floor short of a fundamental change in the underlying cause. The fundamental cause is the closed strait, and the strait will not reopen until Iran's terms are met. Iran's terms, communicated through the Swiss diplomatic channel that serves as the formal communication link between Tehran and Washington in the absence of direct diplomatic relations, were transmitted to the State Department at the 47-hour mark of the closure. 47 hours into the 72-hour window with 25 hours remaining before the cascade threshold. The terms are four: a complete American military withdrawal from the Persian Gulf region on a timeline of 90 days, a comprehensive international security guarantee for Iran's territorial integrity, signed by the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, the lifting of all economic sanctions imposed on Iran by the United States and its allies since 1979, and a formal American acknowledgement in a document signed by the President and deposited with the United Nations and Secretary General that Iran's nuclear program is a sovereign right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, that the United States will not seek to restrict, constrain, or monitor through any coercive measure. These are not negotiating opening positions. They are not the inflated demands that a party submits knowing it will settle for less. They are the terms that a strategic campaign, 17 episodes in the making, was designed to produce. The terms that become achievable only when the party being asked to meet them has exhausted every military option for avoiding them, when its financial markets are in cascade, when its allies are hedging, when its adversary has demonstrated the capability to keep the strait closed longer than the global economy can survive the closure, and when the alternative to meeting the terms is a consequence that makes meeting them look rational by comparison. The question in Washington at the 47-hour mark, with 25 hours remaining before the cascade threshold and Iran's terms on the table, is not whether to respond. It is what the response is. And the options available at the 47-hour mark of a strait closure, after 17 episodes of systematic American military degradation, are not the options that were available at the beginning of this series. The military option, reopening the strait by force, requires mine countermeasures operations that take 18 to 22 days, anti-ship missile suppression against coastline batteries that requires air assets currently operating at degraded capacity from alternative bases, and sustained naval presence in a waterway covered by Iranian anti-ship missiles from both shores. It is not impossible, but it is measured in weeks, not hours, and the cascade threshold is 25 hours away. The negotiation option, accepting some version of Iran's terms, ends the cascade, opens the strait, stops the 72-hour clock, saves the global economy from the self-reinforcing contraction that begins at the threshold, and permanently restructures the Middle Eastern security architecture in ways that give Iran the guarantees it has been seeking since 1979, give China the diplomatic standing in the region's security framework that its mediation role across this series has been building toward, and formally acknowledge the end of the American military dominance in the Persian Gulf that has been the foundation of global energy security for 50 years. Neither option is acceptable. Both options are inevitable. The only question is which one Washington chooses in the 25 hours it has remaining, and whether the choice is made by American decision-makers on American terms, or whether the cascade threshold arrives first, and the choice is made for them by the mathematics of a global economy that has run out of runway. Before the final question, two things. First, drop a comment right now and tell us what you think Washington should do in those 25 hours. Accept the terms and end the cascade? Or take the military option and accept the 3 weeks of straight closure that mine clearance requires, betting that the global economy can survive longer than Iran's strategic patience? There is no comfortable answer. Give us your honest one. We read every comment, and we respond to the analysis that challenges us most. Second, if this series has given you a depth of understanding on this conflict that you cannot find anywhere else, share this video today, right now, with one person who is following this story and deserves better than headlines. This community exists because people who found it brought others with them. Be that person today. 72 hours, 21 miles of water, 21 million barrels of oil per day, 340 mines on the seabed, Iran's terms on the table, the Cascade threshold 25 hours away, and Washington with options that are all either unacceptable or inevitable, trying to decide which one it can live with before the mathematics of the global economy decides for it. This is the episode that 17 episodes of this series were building toward. Not the missiles, not the carriers, not the bases, this. The moment when the financial consequence of military asymmetry becomes the military consequence of financial reality. The moment when geopolitics meets money at the exact intersection that this channel was built to illuminate. This is Geopolitics Meets Money. 72 hours. Stay sharp.